Okay, Delta Stewardship Council is called back to order. We'll operate as a subcommittee until the additional... No, Mr. Fiorini's here. We have a quorum for operation. Ms. Pearson, you have an introduction to make that we probably ought to do first.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce Katie Kasabian. She's sitting over here at the staff table with us. She
Looking innocent.
Interning with the Delta Stewardship Council this summer. She comes from Oregon State, although she lives locally in El Dorado Hills area, and she's studying economics, so be sure to welcome her.
There you are. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you during the summer months. Okay. Members, we are now at file item number 10. File item number 10, if you would turn your attention to that. Mr. Knopp, do you or Mr. Ray want to start off?
I think Dan will.
Mr. Ray.
Well, actually,
Ms.
we'll
Messer.
start with Ms. Messer.
Okay.
Okay, we'll just keep passing this along. And actually, no. Actually, I think our executive officer set this up very nicely in his report, and I don't have much to add other than that this is an action item. As you'll notice as you look at this version of the executive summary, we've left some things in track changes. Those are the changes that we've made since the May council meeting. And as Mr. Knopp pointed out, these changes are a result of comments we received from council members at that meeting and shortly thereafter. Did some negotiating with Mr. Hart, who couldn't make it today, to make the changes. We feel that we've addressed all of the comments and suggestions from council members at this point, and would propose that this is the final version of the executive summary, and would, at the board's pleasure or council's pleasure, request that you approve this so we may move forward with final production of the Delta Plan.
I know that Mr. Natoli still is concerned about language on page 9 that says urban development may be unsafe in the Delta, and out of deference to his interest in that, let's see. We can see if there are questions on other parts of the Delta language, but I told Don that we would reserve action on that language part until we get through. He's here now and about to sit down. So, members, let's see if we can get questions on the executive summary in general. Mr. Damrell. Yeah, you have to hit your button, Frank, on the sound system. Wait. Mr. Fiorini, as a serious engineer, would you please provide? Okay.
Now,
yes, sir.
repeat what I said.
Yes, sir.
I think this is a big improvement, and I have no further comments. I think that
Okay.
did a fine job on this.
Yeah. I watched the staff go through the endless variations and modifications that were involved, and it was a labor of some extensive part, and I agree with that. Don, you had a question. Do you want to reserve that for a while?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. We can hold on to it. I know that Councilmember Johnson will be...
All right, here's what I'd like to do. When Mr. Johnston gets back, we'll resume the executive summary discussion. I'd like to move on to the implementation committee and the sub B and sub C, if we could. Mr. Knopp, at the request of Mr. Natoli, I think that would be a good idea. Mr. Ray, that acceptable with you?
I make your pleasure.
Okay, we're going to circle back to the executive summary. Let's go to 10B, implementation committee. And members, if you notice in your agenda packet, there is a report dated June 27th, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee update. And Mr. Ray, maybe you'd start. This is Mr. Knopp. Okay, Mr. Knopp.
We're just keeping you in the middle.
It's the hot potato pass here. The Implementation Committee, as you know, is one of probably two major actions that the Council is going to be engaged in the very short term as far as implementing the Delta Plan. The other, of course, is completing the science plan. We're going to hear more about that a little bit later. The Implementation Committee is part of the 2009 legislation. We've talked to you about it before, and the purpose of the discussion today is to provide you with an update of progress made at this point. The Implementation Committee it's evolving into probably one of our key roles, which is coordinating among state and federal agencies as well as Delta agencies to smooth the implementation of projects, resolve differences, but basically to get things moving in the Delta. That's the point of the Implementation Committee. It also has another very interesting aspect to it that I think we may have missed the importance of it when we talked about this later, but probably the primary role is to address individual sticky problems that are stymieing progress. And it can do that by creating a work group with a very specific charge and a timeline to develop recommendations that come back to the Implementation Committee. The Implementation Committee then, if we do our job well on the front end, will have a fairly clear range of options to select from, and ideally workable solutions will be part of the process. The idea being here that by focusing energy on specific issues, we can make things happen in a collaborative way among all the agencies and do it in a very timely way. Now, the membership is another thing that we've talked about, I think, at some length on the Implementation Committee. By design, the legislature said that the Implementation Committee would be composed of agencies working within the Delta, and this would be a place to coordinate those agency efforts. A common issue that we've heard back, though, however, is that the public wants to be involved and wants to have an active voice into this situation. Now, a way to balance the legislative intent as well as the clear message from the public, I think, is through the work groups and making sure that membership on those work groups is open to anyone. And, in fact, that is the intent, and that's part of the write-up you'll see in your package. Another way for the public to gain access is either directly through an agency and the agency bringing up an issue at the Implementation Committee meeting, or through the Delta Stewardship Council itself. Through these meetings, a member of the public may raise an issue that, in fact, the Council determines is best handled as a coordination issue among agencies. And that way the Council and the public would also create issues for work groups to resolve in the Implementation Committee. Progress to date. One of the big tasks is finding out who is going to participate, who will be the agency representatives. And we've been busy talking to executives from state and federal agencies, and so far have gotten, I think, a uniformly positive response and desire to participate and to see some action in the Delta. Mr. Fiorini and Chairman Eisenberg were back in Washington last week, and this was one of the topics. And Mr. Fiorini, is there anything you'd like to add about the discussions there that would enlighten the Implementation Committee discussion?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I was encouraged with the meetings we had both at the local level with federal agencies as well as those meetings that we held with high-level leaders of the 6 or 7 federal agencies that have authority in the Delta. Part of my fear is that we're a new state agency that's been given limited responsibilities, limited authority, but lots of responsibilities, and that we would be viewed as like a pesky fly. But we were received with enthusiasm, and our role to help to coordinate and synthesize the activities of multiple agencies is viewed as a plus. That was our goal, to try and present the Delta Plan and the Delta Stewardship Council and the Implementation Committee activities as adding value to the work that state and federal and Delta agencies are already tasked to do. So I think we're off to a good start, at least from the standpoint that we are laying the foundation of a good working relationship and good understanding. The key is going to be selecting from the 73 recommendations in the Delta Plan, those 4 or 5 that hold promise for success within the next 3 to 5 years, and that have general agreement across the regulatory agencies that these are ready for implementation, and that our activities would be supportive of what they are charged to do.
Okay, great, thanks.
Are you going to talk about the attachment, which is an updated version of what we saw, and explain that?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
You know, in my view, this particular effort probably is as significant as anything we're going to do. And the notion of implementation and coordination is what's been missing, as I understand it, my little brief experience on this council. And so therefore, obviously, given Randy's comments and your comments, it just seems to me that you understand the full import. It's just that I think it's extremely important that we keep in mind that we're embarking on something vitally important, never been done before, and its success is going to spell, in my view, the ability to implement this plan, which is the purpose of our existence, as it were.
I fully agree. Our reason for existence is to facilitate the accomplishment of a reliable supply of water, is to facilitate the recovery of the Delta ecosystem, and to provide the maintenance and enhancement of Delta as a place. That's why we're here. It's to make those things happen, and I think this implementation committee is going to be absolutely a key factor in making those things actually occur and be effective. Okay, I have a few other points I'd like to make on this, and number one is the handout that you have in front of you is the latest charter for the implementation committee. It's been an evolving package. The one that was presented back, I believe it was in April 25th, was a simpler version of this. I don't believe there were any names associated with any of the agencies, and we have
That's correct.
A few more that can be added to that list even now. But also the description in here of the work groups, you should pay some attention to, because that's undergone some significant change. And of course, I think the very description of who's involved has undergone a metamorphosis, I think. And one is what I talked about earlier about the charter from the 2009 Delta Reform Act, which said it should be implementing agencies, and yet the obvious concern we've heard from the public that they be involved in this as well. We wanted to make it clear that the public is involved through the Delta agencies, and we changed a couple of things here and took some liberties by including a water agency representative and BDCP as part of that, to try and improve the visibility and accessibility of the implementation committee to the public, as well as other venues I had mentioned before. Are there any questions on this at that
Mr.
point?
Natoli?
Yeah. So when we say water agency representative, are you talking about one of the 3 water agencies in the Delta? Is that, or is this broader than that? This
is on the list of agencies.
Yes. That is the intent.
Okay, so it would be either North Central or South Delta Water Agency.
Yes.
That's the intent. Okay, and then the reclamation district would be any one of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Gray?
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree. I'm sure that everyone.
Hit that.
Hello? Am I? Can you hear me now? I agree that this is a very important part of this whole process. Certainly should have spoken to that. I'm sure the council member believes that. I have some questions regarding the structure of the implementation committee. I know we have federal and state agencies. I know you indicated a third party. Can you kind of talk about that in your comments? Was that an expression that you heard from other stakeholders that besides just federal and state, you needed this other group to include?
Very much so. I think every time we've had this discussion in any kind of public forum, that's been a consistent point of feedback we've received. One of the things that we're trying to balance here is keeping the group as small as possible so that it can be effective. One of the criticisms, I think, of CalFed was that the bureaucracy got to be so large that it was unable to make a decision. So we're trying to keep that in mind as we keep this as efficient as possible. And yet, obviously, one of the strengths of this group, I think, is transparency in the fact that the public has access to the council that the council responds when it hears a comment. And we don't want to lose that effectiveness.
Right. Well, I think it's probably a good thing to do this, but if you do, you want to make sure that you're inclusive of those stakeholders that are involved. I heard Don ask a question about water agency representation, and I didn't really hear your answer to that. What is that? Who are they?
We're going to have one representative from one of the Delta water agencies, and I'm not exactly sure yet how we're going to determine who gets that representation, whether that would be rotating, whether they would select a member. I don't know, Randy, did you have any?
So would it be more than about how many agency would be represented?
Well, we'd only have one representative.
So it would only be one representative
at a time,
okay.
Yes.
Randy, then
Let me try and help clarify this. The implementation committee at this point in time, subject to council recommendations and changes, is viewed as a very high-level group that will meet once every 6 months. We'll identify 4 or 5, 6 projects, actions, initiatives to begin coordinating and implementing among the various agencies that have responsibilities, state, federal, and local. Each one of those actions, recommendation, if you will have a work team assembled around it. And it's at the work team level where the locals, the stakeholders, and interested parties will have the opportunity to meet and work. The implementation committee is not going to spend a lot of time dealing with a particular project. It will exist to help sort out impediments to implementation as they are advised by these work groups that are divided up on specific projects. So for the locals that are concerned about, the locals in the Delta that are concerned about representation, there's going to be adequate opportunity to plug in not only the agencies involved, landowners, there'll be all of the various science disciplines assigned to a work group that are required for whatever the type of project is. So the idea in assembling the implementation committee was that there needs to be a balance. You can't ignore the fact that you have agencies in the Delta that have responsibilities to carry out a lot of actions that we anticipate will take place. So it's important to have representation not only from the Commission and the Conservancy, but also from a water agency and a reclamation district, and particularly as we're talking about perhaps a levee prioritization program or something like that. So I just want to differentiate between this group that's going to meet once every 6 months and deal with high-level problems versus the supportive cast of work groups that are going to be much larger and revolved and formed around the disciplines of a particular project.
Thank you, Randy, but I was really just asking about one area. That's all, but thank you. BDCP, is that where you would bring in the state and federal water contractors, exporters? Where is that?
Well, probably it'd be the program manager for BDCP that would be there, and it would be part of that individual's responsibility to represent them and their interests.
So their interests and perspective would be there. Will the implementation committee will the public have an opportunity to provide input to this implementation committee at any point? Kind of like what we do here.
Well,
they'll have direct involvement in the work groups. So any member, anyone from the public can be assigned.
So you will have an opportunity for the public.
It's a public meeting. The statutory creation of this, mandating it, requires that we conform with
Yes.
state law, which
I know
requires
it's a public meeting,
meetings.
but will you
and
have,
comment.
as part of the agenda or whatever, that the public can comment?
Yes.
That's my question.
Well, at this point, we're trying to avoid having the full public meeting where we have a public comment period as well, but I think that's still up in the air as to what's legally required, and
I don't-
And what will happen?
is that right? Okay,
No,
fine.
public meeting is synonymous with there will be public comment at these meetings.
So
That
is
answers
the
that.
answer that there will be an opportunity where a public comment period will be at these meetings?
Yes,
Okay.
that is the answer.
That's my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
In concluding this section, this is the work to support the work groups and the implementation committee agencies is going to be provided by the Delta Stewardship Council. This is work that is not being undertaken presently. So this is a new task, and it's one that could become fairly sizable because I think this implementation committee is going to be tackling a lot of the very difficult issues of the Delta, and we will be directly involved. So this is one of those things that when we talk about future organizations of the Delta Stewardship Council, it's something that's evolving as we speak and trying to figure out exactly what that all means. And I had one last piece of business on this. As I had described before, we're about to conclude the interview process and hiring an implementation committee coordinator. And it's time, I think, for the council to consider a chairman for the implementation committee. And I don't know what the process is, Mr. Chairman, for doing that, but I would suggest that someone from the council, since I don't know that I can make a motion, but
You can't?
I would suggest that
I'll
someone
make
from
a
the
motion.
council make a motion that Chairman Ms. Fiorini be elected as the
Yeah.
chairman
Ms.
for
Gray?
this council.
Second.
Ms. Gray moves, Ms. Dan Morrell seconds, that Mr. Fiorini be designated. Now, I should probably tell you, this is not unexpected, and Randy went through a brief week or 2-week period of trying to find somebody else, almost anybody else, to do this, but common sense prevailed because his attitude is right and his demeanor is right, and he is deeply knowledgeable on the issues and familiar with the federal and state officials. As a matter of fact, the reality is the additions of many of these names result from meetings and briefings Randy's had with the affected officials, and I know there are other names that will be added on there. So I'd agree with that, too. Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to certainly thank Chris and Randy and others for their work on this. I think that the makeup of the implementation committee, I think, does have a much truer reflection now with the construct that's being put forth of all the parties that are going to be, or at least a good number of the parties that will be involved in implementing, and I want to thank them for their efforts too. I think certainly look at the perspective of Delta agencies. I think that's very, very important, and I think it'll be a good complement to both the federal and state partners. And so I am prepared to support the motion.
Okay. Mr. Johnston, you had I'm sorry, Ms. Gray, excuse me.
Since the chairman is Mr. Fiorini, which I think is absolutely great because he is very knowledgeable, the work group is really where the work really takes place, and they recommend to the implementation committee, correct? All right. And whatever action we assume would be the implementation committee would happen at that level, right? So the connection with the council would be the chairperson briefing the council on any issue that we need to know about, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the chairman and, in this case, Mr. Fiorini and myself
I
will
meant
be
his
at all of those meetings.
Right. This chairman of the
Yes.
implementation.
Yep. Okay. Mr. Fiorini, anything you want to say about your nomination?
More work.
More work.
Well, it's true that I did offer up several very capable people that could adequately serve, and probably much better than I could, but those folks were unavailable, not interested, or for whatever other
Did
reason.
you recommend the new Pope chair the implementation committee? I can't remember.
No,
Right.
but I will tell you this, in all seriousness, anticipating that I might get saddled with this responsibility, I truly have lost a lot of sleep thinking about this, and the importance of, as Judge Damrell has pointed out, the very existence of the Stewardship Council really hinges on performance. And if we cannot effectively implement the plan that we just adopted, then we have failed. And there's going to be a lot of processes going on, including the implementation committee. But I take very seriously the responsibility that you guys are contemplating handing off to me. And I want you to know that this is, and along with all the other things we'll be doing, we're all in this together. But I will gladly accept it if you choose to saddle me with this responsibility.
Pat? Huh?
Great eye.
All right, starting with Mr. Johnston on the selection of Mr. Freeman.
Aye.
Gray, aye.
Aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Totally aye.
Okay, you've got a 6-0 vote on that. Now, Mr. Chair Fiorini, it's my understanding that this draft implementation committee outline that's been presented has more work to do before you're going to ask us to approve something?
This is staff's first attempt at trying to outline and describe the process, so I think it would be worth waiting for council comments and reaction as well as public comment before we are to the point where we would adopt this as our guidelines.
Okay, and apropos of that, Mr. Zlotnick, this was one of the items you wanted to talk about, if you'd be good enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Red or blue? Red. Hello. Greg Zlotnick, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. Just a few comments. One is a basic one on, I don't know what page, maybe page 2 under key responsibilities.
This is of the staff memo?
Yeah.
The draft staff memo?
It talks about something called the Joint Science Authority. Just wondering what that is. Is that just a nomenclature issue? What is that?
I think that's an idea that probably should be crossed off the list.
Okay.
It's something that we had been considering, but I'm not sure that it's gotten
Well,
any
it's
legs.
a similar idea appears later in Dr. Goodwin's presentation of the
Right,
first
but-
draft Delta
Yeah,
Science
but
Plan.
if or whatever it is, will get wrapped up in the science plan.
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. Just didn't have something else floating out there. We
Okay.
didn't know what it was.
Thank you.
Just read these things, you know.
Okay.
The other thing is have some concern with the membership issue. Very much agree with the comments that have been made both by Judge Damrell and Randy that this is obviously the critical sort of linchpin of a lot of what the council's about, the whole coordination, synthesizing of agency activities, the language, across state agencies and the statute is very important. And as you identify in the memo, the language says committee of agency is responsible for implementing the Delta Plan. Our concern, probably won't surprise you, is the additions that, as I think Chris said, they took the liberty of adding the water agency representative and the reclamation representatives from the Delta. And it's not that the Delta shouldn't be represented on this committee. In fact, we think it is, in the sense you've got the Army Corps of Engineers there who does an awful lot of work in the Delta, DWR doing work in the Delta. You also have the Delta Protection Commission, which is appropriate, and the Conservancy, which is appropriate as state agencies involved with this. We think that's very appropriate. And so we would encourage staying focused on the state and federal agencies. I found it interesting, Randy's comment, I think it was something along the lines of part of the justification for the water agency rep and the rec is, they're going to be implementing our program. And I'm not sure the 3 Delta water agencies or many of those rec districts think of themselves as your implementing agencies at this point, considering I think many of them are litigating. So I'm not sure that's a rationale that fits. And in terms of the argument that would say, well, they're implementing the Delta plan, portions of it. Arguably every export agency is implementing the Delta plan based on your proposed regulations. And as Gloria indicated, we wouldn't be at that table other than represented through the higher up agencies that sort of cover things. So we would suggest serious consideration of that when you're looking at who you're asking to be at the table, what type of agency, what their jurisdictions are, what level of authority, what their programs are as they relate to what the plan is, and whether it's appropriate to include particularly 4 and 5. And frankly, BDCP doesn't even exist at this point, so it probably shouldn't even be on the list. Just think about that going forward. People can always be added if it makes sense down the road to do so. And certainly the work groups, which is an opportunity for folks to engage. And on that issue, just also a cautionary note to also think about whether or not, as the implementation committee meets, whether the agencies themselves already have kind of internal groups that can be melded rather than creating a whole nother set of work groups. Whether the agencies are already working on this stuff in terms of the heavy lifting, but still have opportunity for public to learn and interact. But just something to think about in terms of whether you want to reinvent more circles of work groups out there. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Patterson, I know you wanted to talk on the first part of it, but we'll circle back to the executive summary on that. Okay, ladies, any other comments on this section? Okay. All right. Now, we're not going to act on this outline, first draft of the staff memo, but the chair and the staff will come back to the council at an appropriate time with a more refined issue. I just had one, don't answer it now, but I'll just raise a question. Department of Homeland Security, I'm sure there's a rationale for everything, but it just jumped out at me as kind of peculiar. And not that I want to discourage you from having 19 members in a small, focused implementation committee, but think about that. Just think about it.
I'm thinking.
All right. Watch the TV program 24. You think that this is going to assign you Agent what's-his-name packing heat during the entire meeting, and when disputatious agencies are involved, he draws his heat and threatens people until they reach agreement? Okay. All right. Anything else, council members? Okay. All right. We're not taking action at this time on attachment 1. But we do have an additional item before we circle back to the executive summary, which is item 10C, priorities for council oversight. And this is the first iteration of what kind of emphasis we're giving to the future, where the implementation committee clearly warranted its own designation and discussion, which we've started. But this is the rest of the stuff. So Ms. Messer, Mr. Ray.
Now it's
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Mr. Ray.
And, one of the things that the Delta Plan does when it identifies roles for the council in carrying out the plan is emphasizing the oversight role that you all have got. And, of course, that's one of the recommendations that the Delta Plan carried forward from the Delta Vision Task Force's reports. And you've heard about the Delta Vision Foundation's views on that a number of times and the importance of that. The Reform Act gives you both the authority to hold hearings in any part of the state, to carry out that oversight role, as well as to request reports from other federal, state, or local agencies. And the Reform Act, authorizes you to consult specifically with a bunch of named agencies about particular issues, whether it's water resources and fish and wildlife, about the BDCP, or Caltrans, about the state highways that cross the Delta, or others, Central Valley Flood Protection Boards, one we've worked with in the past. And the hearings that we had in April, when we brought representatives of both agencies affected by the Delta Plan as well as observers of the water world. Alf Brandt from the legislature, as well as Ellen Hannock from the PPIC, they both talked about the importance of the oversight functions that you could play and how you could use hearings and reports and recommendations to help spark progress in the Delta. And so we wanted to bring this item back to you to get guidance from you as we begin to think about how we could schedule and lay out a series of oversight activities over the coming months. And so the first thing that we've done on page 2 is suggest 3 principles that we would use to select items for oversight. One would be matters where the council action is needed to set policy or provide direction. An example of that might be the prioritization of state investments in Delta levies, or the development of the Delta Finance Plan, where we really need you to not just gather information and maybe offer recommendations, but really to set direction. Another would be important Delta management issues that other agencies are going to be making decisions about, but where your views have influence. And I think 2 examples of that would be high priorities over the coming months, obviously, are the DDCP and also the State Water Resources Control Board's update, the Bay Delta Water Quality Plan. We held one workshop on the flow objectives that are being considered for the San Joaquin River a few months ago, but we might then continue to watch that process and have periodic reports to the council and have you offer some guidance to us about recommendations you think would be helpful to make. Then the third would be reports on progress, opportunities, or obstacles to implementing other key Delta Plan provisions. And we've all identified things in our own minds as we've been developing the plan, wondering how is that going to work? What kind of progress are those folks making? Why are the obstacles that are preventing that from being done? What additional activities or support could be helpful to accelerate some really important action? 2 things that I think would be high priorities for that sort of oversight, in terms of looking at progress and opportunities and obstacles. One would be actions to improve regional self-reliance and more efficient water use, where we've heard of, if we think of the last months, we've heard about progress local agencies are making in reducing water use, technologies that are creating new opportunities. We've emphasized a number of times the investigating the opportunities for small-scale storage and other regional projects that could be helpful here. And it would be useful maybe to pull together a set of reports and testimony about those issues. And also then the prioritization, implementation of Delta habitat restoration projects. We've got a big lift in trying to carry out not necessarily even the restoration expectations of the draft BDCP, but just to comply with the current biological opinions. How are we going to be able to restore those 8,000 acres of tidal marsh and 10 to 20,000 acres of floodplain, and where's that being done? Who's going to be affected? What activities are necessary to make sure it really comes off on schedule so we can comply with the biological opinions and avoid further interference with the diversions of water out of the Delta. So that would be the third priority that we would use to select topics for oversight. And in each case, we would be asking for reports from the relevant agencies. We would review these reports in public hearings, and we would also compile panels of other experts or stakeholders who could contribute information or their own evaluation of an issue to the council. We would be drafting staff reports that could maybe form the basis for white papers that you all might be able to issue then, consolidating our own analysis with information you receive from the hearings and agency reports. And then you might think of a variety of different kind of outcomes from the hearings. You might be making recommendations to implementing agencies about things that they could be doing to improve progress on a topic. You might be making a recommendation to the legislature or to the Congress about funding needs, or suggest revisions to laws that would be helpful. You may be identifying things that need to be amended in the Delta Plan. If that's we're going to identify new priorities for state investment in Delta levies, ultimately that'll result in a Delta Plan amendment. Or you could be adopting guidelines. Those would be the law gives you the authority not just to adopt regulations, but also guidelines. And these wouldn't be regulations that would affect others, but they really would be directions to the staff about how you want certain activities carried out. An example of that might be the Delta Science Plan or other recommendations you would have about how we should work on things. And then finally, you might be referring items to the implementation committee for further investigation and resolution if that was appropriate. So I'm here to get your reaction to this. If you have ideas about particular topics you think would be priorities, we'd certainly want to know that, because we'd like to be able to lay a schedule out for our staff and start talking to our colleagues and other agencies about how
Yeah.
we might pull this together.
Members,
in a way.
just as a reminder, the staff is not asking for action on this thing. They are asking for a reaction, ideas, suggestions, comments, questions, and then you'll come back to us at an appropriate time with a revised or updated version.
I think what we would do is if we had some consensus at the council today, we felt confident with proceeding initially, we would work with you, Mr. Chairman, and the Vice Chair to schedule some topics for initial consideration.
Okay, Mr. Fiorini.
Dan, this is good. You cite Ms. Hannock's testimony before us in April, but there's an element of her recommendation that I think is critical that's missing. She recommended that we survey each of the state and federal agencies to determine what's in their inventory of current actions and plans. And I think that's a critical first step in carrying out the 1, 2, and 3 that you have listed here. And I'm just wondering, how long will it take to do that?
Well, I think initially our staff has gone through already and compiled an analysis of the Delta plan and the key agencies that are affected by it. It's interesting because, as this I've been referring the other questions to Pat and Cindy, I have been thinking that was a job for the implementation committee, that we would take that information and turn it over to the agencies and say, all right, you guys are the ones who need to carry this out. Where are you with this stuff? But maybe we can do it in advance of your first meeting.
Well, we'll workshop this a little bit, just you and me right now. I think that there's a misconception that the implementation committee is going to be some super committee doing all these things. It's just a subdivision of the council. The council has the oversight, responsibility, and coordination, and so on and so forth. I think it's critical to get that inventory and determine what's already in place, what is planned in the near future, and then, as a council, we can sort out, with an overlay of our 73 recommendations, what's not ready for prime time yet and needs more hearings and discussion and conversation, and what is ready to go. And I think that inventory process with the agencies will help us determine what they believe is their highest priority items and what they're working on now. So I would encourage staff to follow Ms. Hannock's recommendation and try and get that done as soon as possible.
And we have a good base for that, actually, too, in the cross-cut budget, which identifies the state and federal funds that are allocated to the various topics in the whole CalFed program, and we can align that with this. So I think we got a good start on that.
Don? Okay. Other questions? Dan, just some observations. The title, Oversight, Hearings, and Reports, doesn't quite do it for me. If I were making a suggestion, consider something like Oversight Work Plan, because essentially what you're doing is identifying key areas that will involve work by the council staff, the committees, whatever it is. And the hearings and the reports flow from the identification of those and the work plan that's how to do it. So that's kind of the first observation. Secondly, the 3 category titles don't do it for me, and I'm not quite sure what to suggest as an alternative. Matters where council action will be needed. Well, the reality is we've already said in the Delta plan there will be a Delta science plan. We've already said there will be a study leading to adoption of state investment strategies recommended for the Delta levies pursuant to statute. We've already said we will adopt a Delta finance plan. So in some ways, that's not new. That's a declaration of what the council is going to do. And so calling it matters where council actions will be needed is not right. But the management issues, by the way, I agree with all of the topics you've identified, but the way to describe them isn't quite clear to me. I thought the Delta management, putting Bay Delta Conservation Plan and the Delta water quality flows under management issues to be decided by other agencies is not inaccurate, but it's not quite right. Because the council clearly has a potential appellate role regarding the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. It has a responsible agency role identified in statute. the statute also requires the Department of Water Resources to consult with us during the development of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. So there is actual authority. It is not simply unrelated activity by another agency. The third, reports on progress opportunity. I kind of like the sound of that. And you've picked reduce reliance and Delta habitat restoration. I'd suggest one additional thing that was the subject of the last exchange when Mr. Helliker was here. We're approaching, we're not quite yet at a drought year, but we're inching closer to it. And if history is any guide, it could be multiple years. We are directed by statute to include as inherent in the co-equal goals, I'll just highlight this one, our duty to promote statewide water conservation, water use efficiency, and sustainable water use. And I'd suggest to you that might be a added category. And the reason in particular on water conservation is, as you know, the Department of Water Resources told us that they only receive the urban water management plans that are purportedly to be in consistency with statute, this 20% savings by the year 2020. But they do not have the money or staff to review them, to determine whether they're adequate or to determine the accuracy. And in the absence of anyone looking at that, I don't know what it is. So that I recommend that to you. And then just a procedural point. When we do these things, my instinct is, particularly if we're asking for comments from other agencies, which I like, I think the staff has to start out with a contextual memo before we just toss it over to the agencies and let them say whatever they want to say. Because there's no way, part of our duty is to try to just shape the discussion and then get from all of the agencies their reaction to that shaping. They can say whatever they want in general, but if we don't shape the testimonies, we're likely to get a scattershot reaction, and that's a procedural reaction. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're thinking along the same lines.
Yeah.
I may have grabbed titles that didn't necessarily fit, and we certainly were thinking about the role of local water conservation and the use of ag and urban water management plans to help plot folks reduce reliance on the Delta as part of that approach.
Right.
And certainly we want to follow up on the drought actions.
But the reason why I raised the point is that the statute and the inherent objectives includes statewide water conservation. It is not simply the conservation of exporters. And if there's anything that I think our Delta plan does well, it's to point out that there is an obligation on everyone in the entire state to be prudent in the use of water, not just somebody else. And that aspect of it is, I think, very important. Okay. Comments, questions, suggestions?